In this video, we're going to look at the anatomy of the stomach. So keep in mind that the stomach is going to serve as a food storage organ, and it's also going to help us mechanically break down food into smaller particles and help liquefy that food into a form called chyme. Along with that, it's also going to start the chemical digestive process of proteins, and it's going to help chemically digest some fats that we have in our food. So when we're looking at the anatomy of the stomach here, you'll see that the first part of the stomach is going to join with the esophagus that we just finished talking about in a previous video. So the esophagus will come down and join with the stomach at the cardiac region. So remember, we have a sphincter here called the cardioesophageal sphincter, which separates the esophagus from the cardiac region of the stomach, this first portion here. Above that, we have what's called the fundus. That's the enlarged portion at the top of the stomach. Below that, we have what's called the body of the stomach. This is the largest part of the stomach in the mid-region. And then below the body, we have this funnel-shaped region called the pyloric region, which enters into the pylorus. That's the bottom portion of the stomach here. And at the bottom of the pylorus, we have what's called the pyloric sphincter, which can open and close to allow chyme to be churned out into the duodenum, which is the first part of the small intestine. Now you will also notice that the muscle layer of the wall of the stomach is, instead of being only made of two layers of muscle like we normally see, a circular and longitudinal layer, we have a third layer of muscle in the stomach called the oblique layer. And so this layer adds an extra amount of force in the stomach to allow the stomach to be able to churn food more efficiently and really mix that food together with the hydrochloric acid that's going to be present in the stomach, as well as some of the enzymes that are present in the stomach to liquefy that food into chyme. If you look inside of the lining of the stomach, it's lined with mucous membranes, which are made primarily of simple columnar epithelium. And you'll notice that when the stomach is empty, those epithelial membranes kind of clump up together and they form this wrinkling pattern on the inside. So these wrinklings are called rugae. These are gastric rugae that you will only see in an empty stomach. If the stomach were full or distended, those rugae would stretch out and it would look smooth on the inside of the stomach here. So let's look ahead at the gastric pits now. So if we look at the mucosal layer of the stomach here on the inside, this is what we would see, okay, if we were to zoom in and look at it in a 3D view. So you'll notice that the gastric mucosa is lined with structures called gastric pits. So these dip into the mucosal layer of the stomach. And at the base of those gastric pits, you will see a variety of different types of cells that are producing different types of secretions within these pits to help aid in the digestive process. And some of them are used to help protect the lining of the stomach. So we're going to see different types of cells in different regions of the stomach, but most of the stomach is going to be covered with these gastric glands here, like you see here, which are made up of really 5 different cell types. We have mucus cells in this area here, colored in blue. These produce and secrete mucus in the stomach to line these mucous membranes. We also have regenerative cells in the gastric glands, which are there to allow for regeneration, to replace dead or damaged cells of the stomach. We have what are called parietal cells in orange here. The parietal cells secrete hydrochloric acid. They also secrete intrinsic factor and ghrelin, which is a hormone that's going to help suppress appetite whenever we're already digesting food. We also have chief cells, which are colored in this kind of grayish purple color here. The chief cells are the most numerous cell type in these glands typically, and these are the ones that produce enzymes called pepsinogen is the major one, as well as gastric lipase. Now pepsinogen is an enzyme that's going to aid in the digestion of proteins. Gastric lipase is an enzyme that will aid in the digestion of lipids or fats. Along with those, we also have enteroendocrine cells down in these gastric glands, and those enteroendocrine cells are endocrine cells, meaning that they produce and secrete hormones or chemicals that are going to regulate digestion. One example of this is gastrin. Gastrin is the major hormone that's going to help aid in the digestion of proteins specifically. So these gastric glands altogether secrete about 1 to 2 liters of gastric juice per day. And components of that gastric juice, besides water, we know that water will be one of the major components, but along with water, we're also going to see hydrochloric acid in that gastric juice, which is a very strong acid produced by those parietal cells that's going to activate enzymes like pepsinogen and the lipase enzyme that I mentioned earlier. It's going to activate those enzymes and convert them into the active forms, which are pepsin and lingual lipase. And so those active enzymes, again, will help us digest proteins and lipids, respectively. These gastric glands also secrete, again, hydrochloric acid is also going to be used for converting dietary iron to a form that our body can actually absorb and use. We know that iron is a very important mineral that we need to produce hemoglobin in our red blood cells. So hydrochloric acid will help convert the iron into a form that we can use. It's also going to help liquefy the food into that chyme form, that liquid form, which can then be churned out into the duodenum for further digestion. And it's also going to be serving a protective function in that it's going to destroy a lot of pathogens that we might potentially ingest with the food that we're bringing in. Some other components of gastric juice will include pepsin. Again, pepsin is an enzyme that helps us digest proteins. Its inactive form is called pepsinogen, and that's what's secreted by those chief cells. And then that pepsinogen has to be activated by the hydrochloric acid into the active form, pepsin. We also secrete gastric lipase as part of this gastric juice. This is secreted by the chief cells of the gastric glands, and this is going to help us digest a small percentage or small portion of dietary fats that we might consume. Along with those secretions, we're also going to secrete intrinsic factor as part of this gastric juice. The main purpose of this is to help us absorb vitamin B12 within the small intestine. So this is a major vitamin that we need to synthesize or produce hemoglobin. Without the intrinsic factor being produced in the stomach, we would not be able to absorb vitamin B12. And so if a person ever has to have a gastrectomy where they have the stomach removed, they would have to take synthetic forms of vitamin B12. They would have to take supplements to replace that vitamin B12 that they are not able to absorb anymore because of the absence of intrinsic factor. Along with those secretions, we also know that hormones are secreted as part of the gastric juice, and so these are chemical messengers produced by the enteroendocrine cells. Some examples of these would include gastrin, serotonin, somatostatin. But gastrin is the major one that we're going to be concerned with here, because gastrin is the one that's going to help stimulate this whole digestive process, primarily of proteins in the stomach.